A few months ago, I was at the White House when President Trump announced his Liberation Day for America's trade policy. It was a landmark day. Well, today is another Liberation Day. The liberation of America's warriors, in name, in deed, and in authorities. You kill people and break things for a living. You are not politically correct and don't necessarily belong always in polite society.
We don't want to even put them in that position, but they're not going to stand in our way ever again. You'll never see 4 years like we had with Biden and that group of incompetent people that ran this country that should have never been there. Because we had the United States military, the best, the boldest, the bravest that the world has ever seen, that the world has ever known. With leaders like we have right here in this beautiful room today, we will vanquish every danger and crush every threat to our freedom in every generation to come, because we will fight, 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 and we will win, win, win. I want to just thank you once again, and God bless the United States military, and God bless America. God bless you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome to Gaslit Nation. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. The film the Kremlin does not want you to see, so be sure to watch it. Especially to get back at them right now, because the Kremlin is laughing at America over their Russian asset that they've spent decades pumping money into, humiliating our country on the global stage, dragging our leaders across our military to a failed, pathetic, small d dictator, Nazi MAGA fascist rally. It was pathetic. It is a reminder to what one of this show's historical mentors, Dorothy Thompson, who was the journalist who defeated these clowns back in the 1930s, early 1940s, with the power of the pen. Dorothy Thompson was the first journalist to be expelled from Germany by Hitler when he became dictator. She regrouped, took to the pages of the Herald Tribune, got a column that was supposed to be for women, and it became the column in the world for fighting fascism. And what Dorothy Thompson, what her angry ghost is saying to us today is these are small cowards. They're little men. They are little men, and it shows in everything they do and say. Yes, they are idiots, but they are dangerous idiots. And so what I saw in that crowd of military leaders is what you saw in that crowd, believe your eyes and your ears, a demoralized American military. And it's not just Trump. The military has been going through a very hard couple years. I think a lot of nations have been experiencing this. There was, of course, the once-in-a-century pandemic. We may have more. That's not to say we're not going to have more pandemics, but we had, of course, the COVID outbreak. American soldiers were key in working with our NATO allies to help countries with their COVID response. Yes, we had American military soldiers, people up and down in all sorts of jobs, helping out all over the world, isolated from their families, working in emergency situations in communities, in countries where they didn't know the language, the culture, the people, but they were there to help. And then we had, of course, Biden, his objectively disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. That's going to go down in history as just a very dark chapter in American history. However you feel about Afghanistan, no, we should not have been there. That was one of George W. Bush's disastrous, stupid wars. Along with Iraq, we should not have been there. I understand. But the way to get us out was not what Biden and Antony Blinken did. That was a disaster. People needlessly died. And then our American soldiers up and down the chain. We're helping those refugees, bringing them to safety, working really tirelessly. And then again with Ukraine, helping Ukraine in this massive full-scale invasion by Russia. So our American military, all over this massive organization, the largest military on this planet by far, they have had several tough years. There have been reports on disturbing stats on suicide, veterans dying by suicide. There's been just a lot of hard things that they've been going through. And on top of all that, they get this. Do I believe that they're going to follow orders and shoot on American men and women, especially if it becomes apparent that Trump has stolen the midterms, stolen the presidential election in 2028, and refuses to step down from power? Do I think that our military will join him in being what he has said that he wants, which is Hitler's army? He wants an army of Nazi loyalists. He has said that. There have been reports of that. Do I think they will do that? He cannot control them, even if he mass purged and fired them like he's threatening to do to their faces on stage. He cannot. It's just a massive organization. Certainly, we're going to lose talent. We're going to lose expertise. They just deserve better. And if you are a veteran, if you are currently serving, God bless you. Stay sane, stay strong, and just know that you are not alone in this darkest hour for our nation and the world, because if America falls, that's trouble for a lot of countries. I do believe that this is going to backfire on them. Trump's approval rating is massively tanking. The libertarians that do make up his base, they are shocked in like the Reddit chat groups because he looks like a douchebag sending these soldiers into peaceful Portland, Oregon, where they have the most hilarious signs because it's such a creative, well-read city. So God bless you, Portland. And the other thing is, he cannot hide from the Epstein files forever, threatening us in this military rally by telling the American military to experiment to fire on us in our cities. This is all a big distraction from the Epstein files. His lackey, Mike Johnson, is delaying swearing in, certifying the vote of the Democrat that just won in Arizona. Why? Because she would be the final vote needed to force a vote on the Epstein files. And yes, of course, on top of that, we have yet another Trump shutdown because of the chaos machine that he creates in order to cover up his crimes with, yes, scandal. I know this is a hard time. I know it's a terrifying time, but stay strong. Don't just be glued to the news. Don't just check out. If you're feeling a certain way, the best anecdote for it is to join me at the Gaslit Nation phone bank for Halloween. It's our annual Halloween party where we're going to be making calls with our friends at Sister District to get out the vote in must-win Virginia and build the base that we need to overcome the MAGA Jim Crow in the midterms, okay? So the midterms start now. I know people don't want to wrap their heads around that because we're all emotionally exhausted and deliberately beaten down. But do the work, put in some time. It's just like brushing your teeth. It's just like going into the gym. It's just like eating right. You need to do that for your country where you live. You need to put in some time. So come join me October 22nd, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Put in some time with me. We're going to make some phone calls, have some fun, check in and support each other as we fight like hell for our democracy. So I want to welcome this week's guest, Matthew Bodie, a University of North Georgia professor who was harassed by Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA for speaking out against guns on campus. And yes, Charlie Kirk would ultimately be killed by a gun on campus. After being placed on a watch list, Bodie began researching and wrote the Seven Mountains Mandate, exposing the dangerous plan to Christianize America and destroy democracy. So as we're always saying on this show, Trump is the battering ram for the Christian nationalists. They've had a 50-year plan to get here. And they also partnered with the fossil fuel industry, as we've covered in past shows, including with the historian and journalist Ann Nelson, who wrote The Shadow Network, looking at all this as well. And we talked to Gil Duran of the Nerd Reich, who pointed out how big tech is increasingly becoming Christian nationalist itself. Peter Thiel, for instance, is obsessed with the Antichrist and is using the idea of the Antichrist to put a bigger target on us on the left. We're going to have an upcoming episode to talk about that. Now, to get into what is the Seven Mountain Mandate and why does it feel that we are being attacked on all sides? It's the 50-year plan. It's bearing fruit for them. So if they had a 50-year plan, where is our 50-year plan? If you know any wonderful people out there, experts, historians, anybody that you are turning to for insights today, books you're coming across, send them my way, because I'm collecting a library of podcast interviews of wonderful experts to put together our own 50-year plan and normalize that long-term thinking. No, we're not going to get out of this overnight because we did not get into this crisis overnight. It is going to take short-term urgency by getting out the vote in the all-important state races, because there is zero substitute for political power. No one should be mind warped to the point where they give away their vote, they give away their civic duty. Don't go to that level of despair. Your vote still matters, your voice still matters. Every single opposition group that saw the rise of authoritarianism, Hungary, Turkey, Russia, they did not fight hard enough. And they gave in to their despair, and we cannot afford to do that. And if we do, the world is crushed. So roll up your sleeves, get in with me, stay in. We have no other choice.
You know, I've owned 3 different jets in my life, and used them and just burning them up for the Lord Jesus Christ.
Televangelist Jesse Duplantis says God himself told him it's time for an upgrade.
He said, I want you to believe me for a Falcon 7X. So I said, okay.
A Falcon 7 jet like this one to preach to more people around the world. And he's asking his followers for the $54 million.
I really believe that if Jesus was physically on the earth today, he wouldn't be riding a donkey.
From his Louisiana headquarters, Duplantis is among a group of televangelists who preach that their wealth is God's will.
This preys upon the poorest people that want and need money badly, where they're told if they give money, God's going to bless them 100-fold.
Duplantis lives in a 35,000 square foot mansion, tax-free.
He's asking everybody who has less than he has to pay for this jet, and I don't get that, you know?
Fellow televangelist Kenneth Copeland recently bought a $36 million Gulfstream 5 jet.
Praise God. Isn't that good?
The two have commiserated about how they can't fly or pray with commercial airline passengers.
This dope-filled world, and get in a long tube with a bunch of demons.
Right, that's exactly the
And it's deadly.
We asked Jesse Duplantis and his ministries for comment, but they declined to respond. So far, no indication whether he's received any contributions for his jet.
We had the big news of James Comey. No one's favorite person. The left blames him for 2016. Trump blames him for the deep state. And as I'm scrolling through that very Banana Republic authoritarian power grab of Trump's political opponent being indicted, then there's a big news flash of some far-right lady attacking our school system. And it just feels like we're getting it from all sides in a deeply funded, extremely well-coordinated campaign against every single facet of society that we live by and oversees the very quality of our lives and how we are allowed to express ourselves as independent beings with agency, hitting us from all sides. And then I was like, well, thank God I'm talking to Matthew tomorrow. Tell us, what in your research have you seen in terms of what's bearing fruit now from this far-right operation?
Well, as you can imagine, with Trump back in power, there are no obstacles to what he's doing. But he is just one part of a larger picture. As I said before to other people, Project 2025 is one of the 7 mountains. So all the things you just described is a way in which they're trying to take back the culture in all 7 of these areas all at once. And this is why you're feeling it all at once, because there are many groups, including Turning Point, that are trying to do all 7 at once. The 7 mountains thing is a really simple strategy that way. There are areas you could go into, but they're also areas that add up to this larger culture that you want to overtake. They're easy to attack individually, but when you do them all at once, it feels like they're trying to win the culture.
The whole Kimmel cancellation, now Kimmel, of course, is back for now. The Nexstar CEO, he gave an interview where he mentioned his favorite book is the Bible. Sinclair, Nexstar, all of these local affiliates owned by conservatives, they are pumping out local news, Fox News. Do you see that as part of the larger Seven Mountain strategy?
Certainly, because one of the mountains is entertainment. And it used to be that Christians or conservative Christians would try to create their own content. We had Veggie Tales, and we had other things that would run parallel to that. And they would try to win in the marketplace. Our stuff is better. But now, really, what they're doing is taking the fight to the Hollywood liberals, the news media, the fake media, and not just trying to attack them and saying they're wrong. But then we have, as you point out, many owners of these big networks and affiliates saying we're not going to run the thing that ABC wants. And so it is a cultural movement. It is not just one person. It is not just one owner. It is a collection of people. You might call it an oligarchy that are saying on the mountain of media that we want to create this other type of culture. And so silencing people, putting different shows on, focusing characters on individual things, all that is part of the media and entertainment. But I will also say that Trump's, fake news, that has really blossomed into a policy and culture war strategy, because it attacks the very people that are supposed to be reporting on you, and then opens the door up for what they're doing at the White House. These new media spots in the briefing room, and Turning Point USA has their own White House correspondent. So once you attack the people and get their audience down, you have these other people that can just step in and do the news you want them to do.
Tell us the history of the Seven Mountains strategy. How did it start? Who was behind it? And what is their ultimate goal?
So the Seven Mountains mandate, the metaphor of the mountains, dates back to the 70s when two leaders of youth campus ministries, Bill Bright, who founded Campus Crusade, and a guy named Loren Cunningham, who founded a group called Youth with a Mission, they got together in August of 75 and said, these are the areas that we should take back for our culture. And they use that word, take back, influence, because what they had seen in the 60s and up to 75 was a very radically changing culture. So these two people got together and suggested that there was divine inspiration for this list of 7 areas. And I always leave one off when I do this. So I'm just going to say business, education, media, entertainment, and you can fill in the rest. But this list, of course, was not necessarily divinely inspired, because this list of cultural institutions has been in textbooks for decades, and you can guess them without even knowing that, is they wanted to penetrate the culture. For several years after that, they really expanded their operations to do that. Loren Cunningham, before he died 2 years ago, ran a global missions organization, and they would go into countries to evangelize for Jesus, but also to do it in a way that, if we hit these 7 areas, we had better chance of evangelizing. Bill Bright was certainly known for the college campus ministry of Cru, but he became, in the late 70s and early 80s, a political player. He wanted to expand the idea of his ministry to a national platform, because at that time, as you know, conservative Christians were getting more involved in politics. Those two people and a guy named Peter Wagner, who was a professor of church growth, who wanted to expand churches and their membership and how they attracted new people, are really the 3 founding fathers of this movement. Wagner started with the idea of cultural war, culture dominion, and he wrote books, and they really tapped themselves into a network of pastors and religious leaders in the 80s and 90s, more charismatic, that said, we want to take back our culture. The 4th name I'll mention is a guy your listeners might know. His name is Lance Wallnau. He's certainly alive, and he is one of the president's, I'll say, biographers. He's written several books about how President Trump represents Old Testament kings. He's the guy that is credited with the metaphor of the mountains. It was called 7 areas of influence, or 7 kingdoms, or 7 spears. But in around 2000, he met Loren Cunningham, and Loren said, "Hey, I got this list here, and I've been trying to spread it around. Would you take it on?" He's like, "Wow, this is a really good idea." So yeah, he became the guy known as the 7 mountains guy, and he traveled the world with a big whiteboard that he would draw 7 peaks on and talk about the devil and Satan controlling all these areas. And eventually, of course, they needed as I say in the book, an heir. They needed a third generation. If Loren Cunningham and Bill Bright were the first generation, Lance Wallnau is the second one, and the third generation is Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA. He was convinced by other people and Lance to take this on around 2019, 2020. And really since then, Turning Point has not been just a college student conservative organization. It has been the organization in all 7 of these areas. There is an arm of Turning Point for all 7 of these areas. And Turning Point is the most indispensable organization for the conservative movement, as we learned from the memorial service. But also it is the indispensable organization for the 7 Mountains mandate.
So this has been a 50-year plan to hijack our democracy with Christian nationalism, using an authoritarian strongman like Trump, who they could justify as any of the strongmen in the Old Testament.
Right, yeah.
A perfect God's and perfect vessel. And that's why they have no problem with Trump and Epstein and all of his divorces, cheating on his wife with a porn star when his wife just had a baby, and on the list goes. So who is funding all this?
In different ways, they obviously Turning Point gets its own funding from big mega donors and grassroots donors. I think over the years, one of the more interesting things about funding that I noticed is this group that Peter Wagner started. It's called the New Apostolic Reformation. And other people have written about that group. And it is really a collection of charismatic, self-proclaimed pastors and prophets. And what they did over decades, over the 80s and 90s, was sell to Christian businessmen the opportunity to learn how to be a kingdom creator, how to learn the culture war, which really wasn't a phrase back then. And they would come to these seminars and rake in money and teach these successful businessmen and people who wanted to be successful businessmen about how to create wealth, how to create money very, very quickly. And so that funded.
Was this along the lines of the prosperity Bible?
Yeah, exactly. Right,
okay,
right. Yeah.
God wants me to fly a private jet, so give me your money.
Yes. So the prosperity gospel is certainly a segment of this for the non-business guy, right? If you pray enough, if you bless enough financially, or if you do things enough, God will bless you financially. That is certainly part of it. But it was also the idea that if you came to our seminars and learned the spiritual keys to generating wealth, right? So these businessmen certainly expanded their businesses in local communities, some nationally. I mean, there are groups that started out very small in one state, and Bill Bright helped them expand nationally. So I think that's one part of the funding. There were just many people who were eager to hand over $500 or $1,000 to do this. But once the political, movement of Christian conservatives came along that would come in and fund these organizations or fund these seminars or fund candidates, and we've seen this obviously in different ways up to Turning Point. I think that there isn't just one group. Obviously, the Koch brothers comes up a lot and they fund different organizations. I think really what we saw, though, in the funding of Christian nationalism broadly is both churches and businesses and these kind of network apostles and prophets. So there are many ways in which they get funding. We don't know all the ways in which Turning Point gets its funding, but it started out with big donors, but it has grassroots donors and they buy t-shirts and hats off the merchandise website now. So it funds that. Early on, people wanted to hear how God could bless them if they do certain things. And Charlie Kirk is an heir of that because he's gone and spoken at conferences about generating wealth. And so I think that's the prosperity gospel is the theme throughout the decade.
It's the war that the 7 Mountain Mandate is unleashing on universities, large and small, across this country. It is a hotbed of their culture war because it is the academics who are researching, investigating all this and seeing how it plays out in real life and doing the analysis of the detrimental impact it's going to have on people's lives and quality of life. So obviously they're coming after you. How did you fall into all this as an academic?
Fall in is an interesting term because I, did not just, come upon it. They came upon me. I think that I've always said that I didn't find Turning Point. Turning Point found me. Back in 2016, when nobody really knew who Turning Point was, they started this thing called the Professor Watch List, which they're not the first group to target professors or have a list, but they came up with a list of about 100 or so professors. And it was a collection of people that said things they didn't like or comments they made or courses they were teaching that they thought were stupid. And mine was writing an opinion piece for our local newspaper about a bill that's now law in Georgia that allows concealed weapons on college campuses. You can carry a concealed firearm on our campuses. And Turning Point being a pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights organization, this was one of their issues. And me being a professor, that just added to it. So I was put on this list, and they were nice enough to use a fancy picture of me and put my contact information on. And they've been adding to my page as the years have gone on. And things I've said about them, I think they're well aware of me. But that's how I was targeted by Turning Point. And so once I started looking into them and writing about them. I started a blog about Charlie and the different things that he said that are inaccurate or incorrect. And I think over the years, I think Turning Point was a hobby for me. But once they switched from being a kind of pro-market, free market capitalism, big government sucks organization to a Christian nationalism, that just moved it right into my, as you mentioned, research area. So it was no longer a hobby. It was like, now I have to actually spend working time on it. So yeah, it was right up in my alley in many ways. And I think that, I've not faced a lot of harassment or bad emails. I've gotten some in the last few days, I think. But some of my colleagues around the nation who are female or Black or do areas in which are more controversial, their stories are much more horrible. I'll just say one more thing is Turning Point likes making lists. They have a professor watch list. They have a school board list, which is, school board members and school board districts that they don't like. So they like making lists because it's an easy, ready-made list of targets for people.
It's saying that we have you on our list or watching you. It's very Stasi.
Yes, we're watching you. Yes, we're going to pay very close attention to you. And we have seen this, of course, in the last few days since Kirk's death. Many professors being fired for social media comments.
You wrote an article in Georgia speaking out against a law that allows people to carry guns on college campuses. And then Charlie Kirk was murdered horribly.
Yeah.
By someone carrying a gun on a college campus. Obviously, this man did not deserve what happened to him. His family did not deserve what happened to him. Do you think there's any chance that this murder could ultimately wake some people up on their side and say, enough is enough already? We have to. I know at that memorial service, there were comments, like his wife said, I forgive the killer. But then Trump and Stephen Miller, we're going to burn it down.
Yes,
come after
we're going to indict people, yes.
Is any hope that you have that there are some folks on their side that are seeing what happened to Charlie and thinking this is not, we need to tone down the temperature now and come together as a country?
The short answer is no, especially on the gun issue. And we've seen, obviously, school shooting after school shooting happen, and nothing has changed there. So I don't sadly think that one death by a gun on a college campus is going to change that. The line from conservatives or pro-gun people is that, the good guys would kill the bad guys, and that did not happen here.
It hardly ever happens.
Right. So I do think that with your broader question about will things change in terms of the rhetoric, the answer is no, because we saw that at the memorial service, even with it was a Christian nationalism memorial service. So we had the Christian part very clearly early on with the pastor speaking and the prayers and the worship songs. And then as you point out, as we moved further and further along into the Trump administration officials, we saw the nationalism part. And they certainly were not toning down the rhetoric. Erica stood out from those other people with the forgiveness thing. And I don't think that, I'm not saying anything negative about her. She was there to be a grieving widow. And we all hoped she could say words like that. She did very, very strongly. I think that because of who Charlie was to those people, because of who Charlie was to President Trump and to his son and really the whole family, I mean, they've taken this death very personally. They said that. And they're going to use the powers of the federal government to go after their enemies in his name. And this is the power of the martyrdom rhetoric. Everything we do now is in Charlie's name. And we not just have to honor him. It doesn't really matter if he would agree with it or not. He probably did. But that the power of his death now becomes the motivation to do all these things, whether it is thousands or millions of Charlie Kirks being politically organized or whether it's indicting people. This is the power of martyrdom. And this is why it's dangerous in our particular moment in America to give someone that label, whether you think he was shot for saying Christian truth or not. They're using his name to do things that are not Christian.
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, I'm fascinated by the early church. I'm fascinated by Roman Empire history. And the early church was a bunch of people who are like, oh, my life matters. Even though I'm a slave woman, my life matters. And we have records because the Romans were like masters at bureaucracy. We have records of women, especially being deacons in fighting with their bodies on the line to establish the church. It was very much like a socialist, inclusive, Antifa, anti-corruption, reformist movement. And I'm just so fascinated by it. The early church, we're talking the early church, not what it
Before
would
Constantine,
eventually
before
devolve
Constantine,
into under patriarchy popes. But so yes, I digress, as I like to do, but I wanted to ask you, like, what is their ultimate outcome? Like, what will happen to women under an American Christian nationalist dictatorship? What will happen to non-white people?
I do think that the Seven Mountains Mandate is a broad spectrum of people. So I do want to be specific about, let's just say, women and voting. There is a segment of that group that wants to undo the 19th Amendment, that perhaps wants to do voting by head of household, which would obviously be the man. Charlie Kirk is not one of those. Erica is not one of those. They said directly, that would ruin the voting power of conservatives. But that is certainly a segment of population. There is also, as you point out, a sort of divide between whether or not women should be involved in the church or not, whether women should be pastors or deacons or whatever. I think it's a theological debate you can have, but I think with the Seven Mountains movement and Christian nationalism more broadly, the idea of there are certain gender roles. Women would protect the home and make the home an inviting, welcoming place for the man, and the man would protect the nation. And we see this very directly, I think, with the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, whatever you want to call him now. He comes from this background. He comes from this theological statement about gender roles. And so he is promoting the warrior ethos. He's mentioned women a few times, but it really is about men protecting the nation and then the women creating a home. And Erica mentioned this, I think it was the Thursday night speech before the memorial service, right? She thought she created a sacred space for home, for Charlie to come home and not have to deal with any of the outside politics or voices, right? She wanted to be a encouraging place. That type of ideas is throughout Christian conservative churches, but also the Seven Mountains Mandate movement. There are some certainly Christian leaders, Paula White Cain being one of them, who are female and part of Trump's advisory board. But generally speaking, these set roles are where they see women and men. And of course, that leaves out people that don't match those gender categories. That leaves out people who are not married or not family, and certainly without kids. And then it comes to okay, if you're going to enforce that Christian consensus on everybody, what does that mean for the rest of the people who are not? Charlie has said at times that the First Amendment, that generally means separation of church and state, even though that's not in it, meant that the founders were not interested in choosing between Protestant sects. They were generally a Protestant nation. Obviously, that leaves out the Catholics. There's a segment of Roman Catholicism that is Christian nationalist, but most of it's not. So that would leave out the Catholics. It certainly would leave out the other part of the Judeo-Christian heritage that we claim to have, which most people point out as erasing the first part of it. And then, of course, it erases, to me, the fundamental notion of democracy, which is what we are founded upon, is religious pluralism, that there is religious freedom for everyone, no matter if you're Christian or not. So a Christian consensus culture would be Christians running the culture. There might be a couple of places available to that, but some people in the Seven Mountains Mandate movement have talked about, well, the federal government could have separation of church and state, but the states, they're not going to have that. So we would enforce a much tighter, stronger Christian culture in each individual states that certainly could lead to all the things you just mentioned about voting and about no religious pluralism. So what do they want in the end? They want this Christian consensus culture. So electing people is certainly one mountain, but the other mountains are not as clear cut in terms of what they want to do, but they want to erase voices that they don't agree with, that they don't think are Christian enough or not Christian at all. And they want to set up policies and laws and mores, cultural mores, that would perpetuate their version of Christianity. So the mountain of education becomes very important because that's the long game for them. It's not just private schools, but public schools with a patriotic Christian education in it. So you can see in all 7 areas, there are different ways in which they could do this. And I do think that Turning Point was one of the first organizations to say we're going to do all 7 at the same time. And that's really what they've done with their $100 million budget over the last 5 years, is turn and say, we're going to expand in all 7 of these areas.
In your research, is there anything to counteract this. $100 million, the Democrats have that among their donors. But unfortunately, it's all going to overpaid consultants in Washington, D.C. to flood our phones with text messages asking for more money. But do you see anything on the left that even comes close to challenging or trying to dismantle what they've built over 50 years?
No, because one, they built it up over 50 years, and because this seven mountains thing is such a simple strategy. It's 7 particular areas, and so everyone, if it really is on message, even if you might be in a different mountain area. The Democrat Party and the left and the Progressive Party are known for this kind of very unwieldy big tent. They're trying to put all these different groups in, and that is a form of democracy. Let me doubt about that. But the right has said, we're not going to air our grievances with each other. We're not going to do disagreements. We're going to be on message. And this is what Turning Point, I think, was really good at. There's clear theological differences between the Christians that they brought into the tent. And also, of course, there are some Christians that don't like Donald Trump, but would be for Charlie Kirk because he does it in a nicer way. But Charlie specifically made it so that there would be the no disagreements policy, that the Reagan policy of don't talk bad about your fellow conservative, that has been going on for years. And then they've been building these networks so that, just for, again, back to the mountain of education, we have a voucher movement that has been expanding for decades. So that now, in the last 5 years or so, they're expanding the state voucher programs to any student who's never been to a public school. So that's taken decades. I don't think that there are organizations on the other side that are doing that and do it so effectively. So they're behind the 8 ball, behind in so many ways. And then you go out and try to win elections. As a person who I didn't vote for a long time. I voted against Donald Trump 3 times and for the other candidate. And I say that out loud to suggest that I wasn't convinced to vote for a long time before that. So I think that they're just behind in terms of how they message, but whether or not they can do that unified, simple message is still unclear, because we've seen kind of the last 3 presidential candidates trying to talk to everybody, and it didn't work because Donald Trump seems to be a better communicator, and I put that in quotations on the video there.
Yeah, and when the Democrats try to get everybody in line, where, you have to worship Queen Pelosi, like, yas, queen, like as they say online, and couldn't say anything bad about Kamala without K-Hive coming after you. And so there is this feeling among the wily big tent that any attempt by the Democratic Party establishment to get people in formation just comes across as creepy, corruption, and the DNC trying to rig things against the progressive base, which there is a reported document history of. For instance, political vendors were punished if they worked for progressive candidates in Democratic Party primaries. Like, that's all been recorded. So, yeah, so the Democrats, I don't think what Reagan did in saying we're all going to love each other, I don't think that works with the Democrats. It just simply doesn't work. And I think what the Democrats ultimately need is values, being led by values. Like Bernie had it. I wasn't a big Bernie fan in 2016. I mean, he had a odd track record in Congress when it came to Russia and Ukraine that put up red flags. I've talked about it on past episodes. I'll link to it in the show notes. But he did have a winning message of, are you willing to fight for someone you don't know? And people are like, yes. And I think of values. I think Democrats need values, empathy. You can lead with that. And I know Hillary's listening to this going, I led with that. But you have to, but she also got caught on tape telling Black activists, all lives matter. And then Kamala is still getting hounded by Gaza activists because they couldn't just let a rep from Georgia, Ruah Roman, on stage to deliver a unifying message at the DNC calling for peace. So
they do eat their own very quickly. They eat their own, yeah.
Absolutely. I know conservatives aren't kumbaya and all holding hands. I know they have their own tensions and turf wars and so on. But I guess that cohesiveness comes because they're socialized in the church.
Yeah,
and they're used to that socialization of seeing the same people every Sunday, going to cookouts every Sunday with the same people, and you get used to like knowing your people, seeing your people. And now their churches are political action committees,
No, yeah, I think that is certainly true. And I think one of the things that Charlie and Turning Point did well when they started going into churches around 2020 was addressing the issue that churches should not be political. I mean, he directly called pastors who would not talk about political issues cowards because they would not do it from the pulpit. But I think the way he addressed it was that, the phrase they came up with, it's biblical, not political. So they have these founding documents, if you will, the Bible and other things that they say, make very clearly, here's what we should do with our nation. There isn't a document like that. Obviously there are Democrats who are Christians, but at the same time, it's not a straightforward, here's the thing we can follow, a plan we can follow. And I think that just for me, somebody who is in Georgia and who has knocked on doors for Democratic candidates in red districts, values comes across certainly, but also you're never sure what you're for because the other side has been for something for a while. Now, they're also against many things, but this strategy makes it seem like they're for this thing. And if you're for this thing, I mean, that's what Donald Trump Jr. said at the memorial service. He listed all the things and then said, if you agree with us, you're one of us. I mean, that phrase stuck out to me now 4 days later. I don't hear that from the other side.
Nope, it's a mess over there. It's sort of like a feeding trough of consulting contracts. It really is. And Ken Martin, who came from Minnesota, there was a lot of hope in him, but it's just he's got a big mess to untangle there in D.C. I know my sister spent many years at the DNC as a consultant. I've seen it up close. So anyway, moving on, I want to ask you, in terms of the population of people we're up against, because we are a country of what, like 300 million?
350, sure. Well, what the census was, yeah, that's right.
And probably less because people are leaving now or not being or being kicked out. So how many of them are there?
There's been some polling on Christian nationalism and what elements you might agree with. There's been some polling, surveys specifically on the Seven Mountains Mandate, naming that in polls. And generally speaking, there is probably about 30 to 40% of Americans that would identify themselves in some manners as agreeing with elements of Christian nationalism and specifically the Seven Mountains Mandate. The Seven Mountains Mandate as a strategy has taken over the Republican Party. So what a percentage you think are, Republican Party members, they have that. Now, with conservative Christians or evangelicals, there's certainly a segment of the population that is that. I mean, again, 30 to 40%. But I want to stress about the Seven Mountains Mandate that it is not about winning masses of people. It is not about evangelizing, that is converting people to Christianity so that we have a majority of people in the country who are Christians. It is a minority movement on purpose. So whatever percentage we say that they are, they're okay with that percentage because they want to put individual people in the high places. And that's a Lance Wallnau phrase. They want to elect people like Mike Johnson, who's a Seven Mountains person, to a powerful post. They want to elect John Q. Public to a school board seat. They want to elect Nancy Q. Public to a state government workforce development board, and then from there, using the democratic levers of power to be anti-democratic, to enforce the minority Christian consensus culture on the rest of us. So to answer your question, yeah, there's probably 30 to 40% of Americans who agree with this. And if you say, again, the electoral is split 50-50, then Donald Trump brings in the extra 10% of independents or people who are not interested in this. So it's growing. It has grown over the recent years during the Biden administration and this percentage of people. But I think that it works itself as a minority movement on purpose.
They just need to take political power. And once they have that, that's all that matters. So final question to you. America is about to celebrate its 200th birthday. And that birthday began, of course, with the Declaration of Independence. And that was followed by the first big battle and the biggest battle, ultimately, of the American Revolution, which was the Battle of Brooklyn. One witness described something like 15,000 British troops descending on New York Harbor. It looked like all the ships that were coming in. It looked like all of London was suddenly on New York Harbor. And we have a beloved local military museum in Brooklyn at Fort Hamilton that commemorates the Battle of Brooklyn. Washington and the rebels ultimately lost the Battle of Brooklyn, but they won the war. And that's sort of the message of hope, as you hear in Hamilton, the musical. But so now Pete Hegseth wants to shut down this museum here in Brooklyn, right on the near the water in Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. Beloved museum, getting ready to celebrate the 250th birthday of America. Why? And this museum has fragile artifacts and documentation. And without that funding, it's closed down. What happens to all that? And that's one of several American military museums on the chopping block by Pete Hegseth under the justification of they're now, the Department of War, as Trump now calls it, is prioritizing lethality, like killing people, like being a killing machine. Not education, not preserving our heritage, not preserving our history, and not preserving witness. Like, what is the motivation of that? I was just thinking the Kremlin must love this because they're weakening us from within and they're taking away our sense of self and our history. The Kremlin is all about that in Ukraine right now. So what would the motivation be for Pete Hegseth, who's coming from this 7 Mountain Mandate, Christian nationalist movement? What is the end game in that?
I mean, I think that story that you laid out is repeated, it's being repeated in all the service academies. He has redone the board of trustees. Charlie Kirk was on one of them for the Air Force Academy. And those board of trustees are redoing the curriculum of these service academies, both in terms of the physical standards they have to pass, but also, as you mentioned, the history that they get in their nation. And I think we've heard this story of museums being changed over or being erased or ended because of specifically, I think, the mountain of education is about 2 things. One, a patriotic education. We're the greatest country on the earth. Here's our great history. We had some missteps back in the day, but we're good now. And then 2, with the patriotism becomes this idea that God is on our side. We've had the Puritans and the City on the Hill and other things that go along with that, but that we can't debate our history because we know our history. And that's the debate between the 1619 Project and the 1776 Commission is a great example of that. They want to erase things that would open us up for debate or open us up for things that don't go along with their patriotic education. I don't know, losing a battle might be the reason they're killing that museum there. But they're doing it in other places so that they can set up their own curriculum, their own museums, their own idea of what American history should be, because they know that eventually teaching that history creates people in many ways like Charlie Kirk, who understands and says those things again and again.
Yeah, well, maybe this museum at Fort Hamilton might survive, but there are several that will not. And so are they trying to purge to get money to do something just awful, like expand their gulag or militarize, put like greater military in cities across America?
No, I just think that they don't like museums that opened up for debate. I mean, you have these different pieces that could talk about the history in different ways. I mean, they're certainly reducing the size of government by paying for this museum, but I don't think necessarily they're interested in collecting a lot of money for another thing. They obviously want to fund the Department of War and Defense and its great lethality, but I think they're just interested in cutting the size of government and also suggesting that government should not pay for things they don't agree.
All right. And so are we basically going to become like a white Iran with all these mullahs on the Supreme Court? Final question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know what foreign country is the model here. We have a lot of examples from Hungary here. You know, the UK is trying to do the same thing in terms of erasing their immigrant population. I don't know. I mean, there are models for strongmen around the nation. I do think the model for the 7 Mountains Mandate is their mythical version of the, founding of our country. It was a Christian nation because it had all these churches and the preachers were part of the political establishment. There's this myth about preachers fighting in the Civil War called the Black Robe Regiment. But also I think there is a hierarchy of gender there. They might not necessarily want to take away the 19th Amendment, but clearly men should lead and women should do something else. Now, race, that might be a different story. There are some people out there really into our diversity. Some people are not in the 7 Mountains movement. But I do think the idea of what they think happened in 1776 is what they want to return to. And that may be the model they're searching for.
Including slavery.
Well, intellectual slavery, sure.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up at the Truth Teller level or higher on Patreon. Discounted annual memberships are available, and you can also give the gift of membership. All summer long, Gaslit Nation, created with love and anger, has been presenting a special series featuring leading experts on how to smash the patriarchy and the oligarchy to make the world safer for everyone. Trump didn't happen overnight. Let's plant seeds of hope together. For the hottest of hot takes, join the conversation at the Gaslit Nation salons every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll be there with our global community of listeners. Come for deep dives into the news, learn from fellow listeners, and share what's happening in your corner of the world. Can't make it live? Recordings of our Monday salons are available on Patreon, along with our monthly Gaslit Nation book club. Access the salons, bonus shows, ad-free episodes, and more at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. To help Ukraine with urgently needed humanitarian aid, join me in donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. To support refugees in conflict zones, donate to Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. And to protect critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Andrea Chalupa. Our editing wizard is Nicholas Torres. And our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And don't forget to check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. Original music in Gaslit Nation is composed by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was generously donated to us by Hamish Smythe of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Todd, Dan, Milo, and Cubby. Ruth Ann Harnish. Abby Zavos. Lily Wachowski. Ice Bear is Defiant. Sherry Escobar. Sydney Davies. Work for Better. Prep for Trouble. That's right. John Schoenthaler, Ellen McGirt, Larry Gasson, Ann Bertino, David East, Mark, Sean Berg, Kristen Custer, Kevin Gannon, Sandra Collins, Katie Masuris, James D. Leonard, Leo Chalupa, Carol Golstad, Marcus J. Trent, Joe Darcy, D.L. Singfield, Nicole Spear, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Mark, Diana Gallagher, Leah Campbell, Jared Lombardo, Randall Brewer, and Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all so much for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.